Ancient walls hold stories that no book could ever capture. These silent stone surfaces carry the marks of forgotten upheavals, natural disasters, and human struggles etched into their very surface. By the end of this journey, you will understand how to read these physical narratives and see history through an entirely new lens. We will uncover why certain walls in Turkey show mysterious tallies from over 9,000 years ago, and how burn marks on Trojan stones may confirm legendary wars. What do you believe is the most enduring mark a civilization can leave behind? These stone surfaces are more than just ruins. They are a unique language, one that speaks through physical marks rather than written words. For ancient peoples, architecture was never just about shelter. It was a living canvas, a durable record of everything a society endured. The walls of their cities and homes absorbed the shocks of history, bearing the brunt of invasions, the fury of natural disasters, and the slow, steady pressure of social change. Every single chip in the stone, every fracture line, and every clumsy repair job tells a story. Renowned archaeologist Dr. Elena Torres puts it perfectly, saying that every chip and fracture is a paragraph in the biography of a civilization. This is how we begin to read them. A deep gouge in a gate might not be a random act of vandalism, but the desperate mark of a siege weapon. A section of wall rebuilt with mismatched stones whispers of a catastrophic earthquake that required a rushed, urgent repair. A layer of soot and fire-cracked rock could be the only remaining evidence of a city sacked and burned. These physical narratives are not secondary sources. They are primary evidence, often more honest and immediate than any polished royal inscription. They show us what happened in the moment, not what a king later wanted carved into history. This non-written evidence can be as revealing, and sometimes even more so, than any ancient manuscript. So how do we translate this language of stone into a story we can understand? But to truly understand their message, we must first learn to distinguish the accidental from the intentional. Not every mark on these ancient walls is a scar from a disaster or a conflict. Some were put there on purpose, carved with meaning by the very people who built them. This is where the real detective work begins, separating random wear and tear from a deliberate human signal. Think of it like this: if you see a single scratch on a rock, it might mean nothing. But if you see 100 scratches in a perfect grid pattern, you know someone was counting something. Archaeologists use this same principle of pattern recognition. They look for repetition, for symmetry, for marks that appear in specific, meaningful locations. A deep, solitary gouge near the base of a wall might be from a plow, but a series of identical, carefully spaced grooves above a doorway is something else entirely. That could be a tally of generations, a lunar calendar, or a protective symbol. Context is everything. A mark found in a sacred space, like a temple, is far more likely to be ritualistic than one found in a grain storage room. Experts also analyze the tool marks themselves. The type of implement used, the angle of the strike, the force applied. All of these microscopic details can reveal whether a cut was made quickly in violence or slowly with ceremonial care. This forensic approach transforms a chaotic collection of scratches into a coherent story, a story of people using the most permanent canvas they had to make their mark on the world. It is this meticulous process of interpretation that allows us to move from simply seeing old walls to truly reading them. And with these tools in mind, we can now begin to decipher some of history's most silent and compelling mysteries. One of the most profound examples of this stone language comes from a city of staggering age. In the ancient settlement of Çatalhöyük, in what is now Turkey, the walls of 9,000-year-old homes are covered in strange, repetitive scratches. These are not the dramatic gashes of a battle or the cracks of an earthquake. They are something far more subtle and in many ways far more revealing. They are a collection of fine lines, carefully and deliberately etched into the plaster surfaces, often arranged in clusters or grids. For decades, these marks were a complete mystery, seen as little more than abstract Neolithic art or perhaps idle doodling. But when archaeologists looked closer, a pattern began to emerge. The marks were not random. They appeared in specific domestic spaces, the very heart of daily life. They were found on walls near hearths and sleeping platforms, places where a family would gather. This crucial context shifted the entire interpretation. These were not decorations, they were records. The most compelling theory is that these grids of lines are tallies, an ancient accounting system etched directly onto the walls of a home. A family might have been counting something of immense importance to their survival. Perhaps it was the number of days between seasons, a primitive calendar tracking the migration of animals or the ripening of crops. Maybe each line represented a basket of grain harvested, or a newborn animal added to their herd. This was a society living millennia before the invention of writing. Yet they felt a deep, fundamental need to record, to measure, to keep track of their world. These scratched walls are a window into the Neolithic mind, showing us a people acutely aware of time and resources. They hint at a community whose entire existence was tied to the relentless, cyclical patterns of nature. Every scratch is a silent testament to their struggle to understand and impose order on an unpredictable world, making their homes not just shelters, but the very first libraries of human experience. Far to the west of Çatalhöyük, another set of walls tells a more ambiguous story. The Grand Palace of Knossos on the island of Crete stands as a magnificent relic of the Minoan civilization. But look closer at some of these ancient stone surfaces, and you will find strange, long grooves carved directly into them. These are not the fine, purposeful tallies of a Neolithic home. These are deep, sometimes ragged channels that cut through the masonry, and their true origin has been a subject of intense debate for decades. One compelling theory points directly to the volatile earth beneath Crete. This region is seismically active, a place where the ground itself can tremble and shift without warning. Some researchers argue these grooves are seismic scars, the brutal evidence of a massive earthquake. They propose that as the ground shook violently, enormous stone blocks within the walls were forced to grind against each other. Over years or even centuries of repeated tremors, this relentless friction could have slowly, inexorably worn these deep channels into the solid rock. If this is true, each groove is a silent recording of a terrifying event, a physical memory of the very ground shaking apart. Yet there is another, completely different interpretation. Other scholars suggest these marks are not accidental at all, but the result of deliberate human activity. They could be evidence of ritual scraping, a practice where sacred stones were ceremonially scoured to collect powdered stone for use in religious ceremonies. Alternatively, they might be the practical marks of renovation. The Minoans were brilliant engineers and architects, constantly expanding and modifying their great palace. These grooves could be the tool marks left from carefully dismantling and realigning walls to accommodate new construction. This duality is what makes these scars so fascinating. A single mark can tell two entirely different stories. One story is of a civilization at the mercy of immense, uncontrollable natural forces, adapting and rebuilding after each disaster. The other is a story of a sophisticated society in control of its environment, deliberately altering its sacred spaces for either spiritual or practical reasons. Both interpretations reveal a profound truth about the Minoans. They were a people defined by their adaptability, whether they were responding to the wrath of the earth or the evolving needs of their own culture. The walls of Knossos do not give up their secrets easily, forcing us to consider that sometimes the most enduring mark is not a clear sentence, but a deeply mysterious question. This same principle of reading the walls applies far beyond the palaces of the Mediterranean. In the sprawling, meticulously planned city of Mohenjo-Daro, part of the ancient Indus Valley civilization, the stones tell a quieter, more subtle story. Here, the scars are not from fire or quakes, but from something far more gentle, the soft, relentless brush of human bodies over centuries. On certain walls, particularly those lining narrow streets or framing the entrances to large public structures like the Great Bath, you can find surfaces worn surprisingly smooth. This is not the work of wind or rain. This is a specific, polished abrasion that comes from one thing only: constant contact. Imagine the sheer number of people, generation after generation, all passing through the same narrow space, their shoulders or hands lightly grazing the same spot on the wall. Over hundreds of years, that collective, unconscious action acts like a gentle sandpaper, slowly wearing down the hard brick. These polished surfaces are a physical map of human movement. They allow archaeologists to literally trace the paths that people walked most frequently. They reveal the city's social hotspots, the arteries of daily life that pulsed with foot traffic. A smooth patch on a corner suggests a busy intersection where people turned. A consistently worn wall along a street points to a major thoroughfare. This wear pattern transforms a silent, empty ruin back into a living, breathing city. It shows us where crowds gathered, where processions might have walked, and how people navigated their incredibly organized urban environment. In a civilization that left behind no deciphered written records, these abraded walls become a priceless text. They are the silent testimony of a society that valued order and community, their most intimate daily routines permanently inscribed into the very fabric of their city, simply by the act of living in it. Yet another form of scar speaks to a culture's deepest beliefs, not through wear or disaster, but through deliberate, sacred destruction. The immense Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, Mexico, presents a startling sight to those who know how to look. Across its massive stone facades, you can find sections where the outer plaster has been intentionally and carefully chipped away. This is not random vandalism or the result of decay. These are precise removals, creating patterns of missing material that were clearly done with purpose. For a long time, this damage was misunderstood, seen as simple erosion or perhaps later looting. But the pattern tells a different story. The chipping is often found in specific, ritually significant areas of the structure. This was not an act of neglect. It was an act of renewal. In ancient Mesoamerican thought, architecture was not a static monument. A pyramid was a living entity, a sacred mountain that needed to be periodically renewed, just as the world itself was renewed through ritual and sacrifice. Scholars believe these chips are evidence of a ceremony where the old outer layer of the pyramid was ritually removed, perhaps to be replaced with a new, fresh layer of plaster and paint. This act of destruction was paradoxically an act of creation and maintenance. It sustained the spiritual power of the structure, but it may have also served a political purpose. A new ruler, a new dynasty, or a shift in religious doctrine might be marked by this physical renewal of the city's most important monument. The scarred walls of Teotihuacan show us a society in a constant, active conversation with its gods and its leaders. The architecture was not meant to remain frozen in time. It was meant to change, to be consumed and reborn, mirroring the cycles of the cosmos itself. The most profound mark a civilization could make, it seems, was sometimes the one they chose to remove themselves. Perhaps no ancient scar is more evocative than the mark of fire. At the legendary city of Troy, the very stones seem to whisper of epic tales not as myth, but as historical fact. Excavations there have revealed a startlingly clear timeline of destruction, written not in ink, but in layers of soot, ash, and fire-cracked stone. Across multiple distinct levels of the ancient city, archaeologists have found the unmistakable evidence of catastrophic blazes. Walls are blackened with soot, stones are reddened and fractured from intense heat, and layers of ash and charcoal are packed between the ruins of toppled buildings. This is not the evidence of a single tragic accident. It is the signature of repeated city-wide infernos, each one marking the violent end of an era. The most famous of these burnt layers corresponds perfectly to the time frame traditionally assigned to the Trojan War of Homer's Iliad. It shows a city that was not merely burned but utterly ravaged. The pattern of destruction points towards a deliberate sacking, a systematic effort to erase a powerful rival from the map. This physical evidence gives startling weight to the ancient stories. It suggests that the epic poem, passed down orally for generations before being written, may have been rooted in a real, devastating conflict that scarred the collective memory of the ancient world. But the story these walls tell is even bigger than one famous war. The multiple layers of fire damage reveal a city that was built, destroyed, and rebuilt on the same strategic site over and over again. Troy's location made it a powerhouse of trade, but also a constant target. Each scorched layer represents a different chapter in a long history of regional power struggles, a cycle of conquest, resilience, and rebirth. The scars are a brutal timeline of violence, showing us that the Trojan War was likely not a unique event, but merely the most famous eruption in a centuries-long volcano of geopolitical tension. The stones of Troy prove that even the most timeless legends can leave a very real and very burnt mark on history. Deep within the narrow, winding canyons of Petra, the rose-red city carved from living rock, a different kind of story is written on the walls. Beyond the famous, towering facades of the treasury and the monastery, the sandstone itself tells a quieter tale of survival and strategy. Here, the scars are not from disaster or deliberate destruction. They are subtle enhancements, a collaboration between human ingenuity and the raw, unforgiving landscape. The Nabateans, the master traders who built this desert capital, did not fight their environment. They learned to read it and then to rewrite it just enough to serve their needs. On certain rock faces, particularly along the crucial trade routes that snaked through the mountains, you can find natural features that have been slightly altered. A deep, shadowy fissure in the cliff wall might be carefully widened and deepened by human hands. A naturally occurring, lighter-colored vein of stone could be chiseled to make it more pronounced and visible from a distance. These are not grand monuments, they are pragmatic signposts etched directly into the geography. In a labyrinth of similar-looking gorges, these modified marks became a vital navigation system. For a caravan laden with precious incense and silks, spotting a specific human-enhanced crack in the rock could mean the difference between finding the path to water and safety or becoming lost in the desert heat. But these inscriptions served a dual purpose, one of control as much as guidance. By subtly marking the routes, the Nabateans could effectively funnel all trade through the passages they monitored and taxed. This was how a kingdom without written maps enforced its economic will. The very environment became a tool for managing the flow of wealth and people. The enhanced walls of Petra show us a civilization that saw the landscape not as an obstacle to be conquered, but as a partner to be understood and gently manipulated. Their most brilliant architectural feat was not a single building, but this entire, seamlessly integrated system of natural waypoints, turning the chaotic wilderness into a regulated, profitable highway. Far from the desert canyons of Petra, the granite hills of southern Africa hold another kind of inscribed story. The massive, dry stone walls of Great Zimbabwe curve and climb, their surfaces bearing the subtle but telling marks of a long conversation with the sky. These are not the dramatic scars of siege or inferno, but the gentle, persistent grooves left by water, a testament to a civilization mastering its environment. Upon these ancient stones, you can trace faint streaks and channels, patterns of erosion that seem too deliberate to be purely random. For a long time, these were overlooked as simple weathering. But to the trained eye, they form a complex narrative of adaptation. These grooves are the physical evidence of a sophisticated water management system, a series of cleverly designed channels and conduits carved directly into the architecture. The builders of Great Zimbabwe were redirecting the precious rainfall that fed their city. They were not just building walls, they were sculpting watersheds, guiding every drop from a curved wall into a specific gutter, and from that gutter into a waiting cistern. In a land of long dry seasons and intense rainy ones, this control over water was the difference between prosperity and collapse. But the story these weathered walls tell might be even deeper. Some scholars see a ritual purpose in these patterns. The consistent pathways worn into the stone could also mark the routes of ceremonial cleansing, where water was not just collected but used in purification rites, its flow sanctified by tradition. Each streak is a fossilized moment of both practical ingenuity and spiritual significance. This dual interpretation reveals a society acutely in tune with the rhythms of nature, one that saw environmental challenge not as a threat, but as a puzzle to be solved with both engineering and faith. The walls of Great Zimbabwe do not boast of kings or conquests. They whisper a more vital truth, the story of a people who listened to the rain and answered with stone. High in the Andes, the stones of Machu Picchu tell a story of anticipation. This ancient citadel, perched between soaring peaks, does not bear the scars of a single catastrophic quake. Instead, its walls display the brilliant foresight of its builders, a deliberate design for survival. Look closely at the masonry, and you will see something remarkable. The doors and windows are not perfect rectangles. They are trapezoids, wider at the bottom and gently sloping inward as they rise. The stones themselves are not uniform blocks laid in straight, rigid lines. Many are polygonal, their irregular shapes fitting together like an intricate, three-dimensional puzzle. These are not architectural quirks or aesthetic choices. They are engineered solutions born from centuries of living on violently unstable ground. The Incas knew the earth here could tremble without warning. So they built their sacred city to dance with the tremors, not fight them. When an earthquake strikes, a rigid wall of perfect squares will crack and crumble under the stress. But a wall built with these flexible joints and sloping frames has room to move. The stones shift and settle, the entire structure swaying and flexing as one, before settling back into place when the shaking stops. The scars you see here are not just evidence of past quakes. They are the proof that the walls held. They are the graceful, calculated response to a constant threat, etched permanently into the granite. This is a scar that speaks not of destruction, but of profound intelligence, a civilization so in tune with its environment that it could build a symphony in stone, composed specifically to withstand the Earth's most violent movements. Even the most isolated civilizations left their stories etched in stone. On the remote shores of Easter Island, the giant moai statues stand as silent, stoic sentinels, capturing the world's attention for centuries. But to understand the true story of the Rapa Nui people, we must look past these famous faces and examine the humble basalt walls that supported their society. These dark volcanic stones bear a different kind of mark, not grand carvings but countless parallel grooves striated across their surfaces like the lines on a record. For a long time, these scratches were dismissed as simple wear and tear. The truth, however, is far more revealing. One compelling theory suggests these grooves are the result of generations of intense, repetitive labor. Imagine the constant, grinding motion of sharpening stone adzes and other vital tools against these rugged surfaces. Each groove would represent hours of work, the necessary maintenance for the tools that felled trees, carved canoes, and shaped the very statues the island is known for. If this is true, these striated walls become a time capsule of daily toil, a physical record of the immense effort required to sustain life on such a remote island. Yet there is another, more spiritual interpretation. The consistent, rhythmic pattern of these grooves, their repetition and location, also hint at a possible ceremonial use. They may have been part of agricultural rituals where tools were sanctified against the stone before important plantings or harvests, blending practical sharpening with a plea to the gods for fertility. This duality is heartbreakingly poignant. These walls silently document a society deeply connected to its environment, yet also one straining against its limits. The very act of sharpening tools to carve more moai or clear more land may have accelerated the deforestation and resource depletion that many scholars believe led to their social upheaval. The grooves are a testament to both their incredible ingenuity and their tragic trajectory, a permanent scar left by a people caught between their ambitious culture and the fragile ecosystem that supported it. They remind us that a civilization's most enduring marks are not always its grandest monuments, but often the subtle, worn traces of its everyday struggles. The finality of a city's destruction can be read in the pockmarked stones of Carthage. These walls do not tell a story of a battle lost, but of an entire civilization systematically and deliberately erased from the earth. Following the brutal conclusion of the Third Punic War, the victorious Romans were not content with mere conquest. Their goal was total eradication, a mission to dismantle every last stone of their greatest rival and salt the earth so nothing would ever grow again. The historical accounts of this scorched earth policy are stark, but the walls themselves provide the chilling, physical proof. Across the ancient foundations, you can still see the unmistakable impact craters from Roman ballista stones, the heavy projectiles that first battered the city's defenses. But the more telling scars are the countless smaller pits and gouges left by picks, chisels, and crowbars. This is the evidence of the painstaking, methodical work that came after the fighting stopped. Legionaries were ordered to tear the city apart, stone by stone, until nothing of its grandeur remained. Each small pit is a mark from a tool prying a block loose, a chip from a hammer splitting masonry. These are not the chaotic marks of looting. They form a pattern of ruthless efficiency, a grid of destruction that maps the Romans' relentless progress through the city's heart. The walls of Carthage are a unique historical record. They corroborate the written accounts of its utter destruction, but they also add a terrifying layer of immediacy. They show us the scale of the effort, the immense manpower required to unmake a city, and the profound, lasting impact of ancient total warfare. It was not enough to defeat an enemy. The very memory of their existence had to be physically scrubbed from the landscape, a permanent scar intended to serve as a warning for all of history. But even the most meticulously planned destruction pales before the slow, patient erosion of nature. At the ancient temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the story is not written in violent gashes, but in the gentle, relentless touch of water and hands. The sandstone walls here present a complex tapestry of wear, a record of both elemental force and profound human devotion. In some places, the stone is deeply channeled by centuries of monsoon rains, their torrential downpours carving soft, vertical grooves into the facade. This is the undeniable signature of the environment, a force that even the greatest empire could not fully control. Yet right beside these natural scars, you find surfaces worn impossibly smooth, not by rain, but by the gentle, repetitive brush of countless human palms over hundreds of years. This is intentional polishing, a physical manifestation of reverence. In areas surrounding sacred Buddha images or at the bases of particularly important pillars, the stone gleams with a soft, almost waxy sheen. This contrast tells a dual story. It shows a society that accepted the uncontrollable power of nature, even as it actively maintained the sacred through constant, tactile veneration. The Khmer Empire did not just build a monument and abandon it. They engaged with it, their very act of worship becoming a form of preservation, slowly shaping the stone with their devotion. The most worn paths through the complex are not accidents. They are maps of pilgrimage etched by the feet of the faithful. The most polished stones are not damaged. They are loved. In this way, the walls of Angkor Wat reveal a civilization in a continuous, sacred dialogue with its own creation, where function and reverence were forever intertwined, each leaving its own unique mark upon the stone. Some walls hold not one story, but two, separated by years yet frozen in the same moment of terror. In Pompeii, the fractures running through ancient villas are a palimpsest of disaster, a physical record of two separate calamities captured in stone. The most obvious scars are the brutal, sprawling cracks from the immense weight of volcanic rock and pumice that buried the city. These are the marks of the final, cataclysmic event, the sheer force of the mountain's fury crushing roofs and shattering walls. But if you look closer, you can see another story hidden within the stone. Many of these walls show older cracks, ones that had been carefully repaired with a different type of mortar long before the ash ever fell. These are the quiet, lingering scars from a powerful earthquake that shook the region 17 years before Vesuvius erupted. That quake had already done significant damage, and the people of Pompeii had worked tirelessly to rebuild, patching their homes and their lives back together. This layered evidence allows archaeologists to perform a kind of forensic timeline. The older, repaired cracks show a city that had already known suffering and had adapted to it. The newer, violent fractures tell of a catastrophe from which there was no recovery. Together, they paint a heartbreakingly human picture, not of a city frozen only in its final moments, but of a resilient community that had already endured one disaster, only to be met with an unimaginable second. These walls remind us that history is rarely a single event, but an accumulation of struggles, a testament to the fact that civilizations often build their greatest monuments not from pristine stone, but from the fragments of what they have already lost. Deep in the Guatemalan rainforest, the stone temples of Tikal rise above the jungle canopy, their surfaces whispering of a different kind of violence. Here, the scars are not from nature or accident, but from a cold, calculated act of erasure. On many of these grand structures, you will find patches of strangely smooth, blank stone, surrounded by the remnants of magnificent carvings. This is not decay. This is ablation, the surgical removal of a city's own history. The intricate stucco reliefs that once depicted gods and kings have been meticulously chipped away, their features obliterated by deliberate, targeted blows. These blank spaces are negative scars, ghostly silhouettes where a powerful memory used to be. For the Maya, architecture was memory cast in stone, a permanent record of a ruler's divine right and earthly achievements. To alter that record was to rewrite reality itself. When a dynasty fell or a new faction seized power, the victors would often launch a campaign against the very stones of their predecessors. They understood that to truly conquer a people, you must first conquer their past. By defacing these temples, they were not merely vandalizing property. They were performing a potent act of ideological control, chiseling out the old regime's legitimacy and creating a void where a new narrative could be written. The scar itself became the message, a stark, public declaration that the old order was gone, its history rendered null and void. This practice reveals a sophisticated and chilling understanding of power. It shows us that the most enduring conflict is often not over territory but over memory, and that sometimes the most powerful mark you can make is the one you choose to remove. A city's wealth can become its most visible target, a beacon for conquest. In the heart of the Persian Empire, the ceremonial capital of Persepolis stood as a glittering testament to unimaginable power and riches. Its grand audience halls and palaces were sheathed in precious materials, with walls adorned by gold leaf and inlaid with lapis lazuli and ivory. These surfaces were not merely decorative. They were a direct physical manifestation of the empire's vast economic reach, drawing tribute and treasure from every corner of the known world. But this dazzling display would ultimately draw a very specific kind of destruction. Following Alexander the Great's decisive victory, the city did not just suffer the typical scars of battle. Instead, its walls were systematically and meticulously stripped bare. The marks left behind are not from swords or siege engines, but from the careful, greedy work of pry bars and chisels. You can still see the precise gouges where metal tools were hammered into the seams between stones to lever out sheets of gold. There are the fine, scratchy patterns left by blades scraping away the last stubborn flecks of precious metal from the stone. These are not the chaotic marks of random looting. They show a deliberate, almost industrial process of reclamation, a calculated harvesting of value from the very architecture. This scarification reveals a brutal truth often glossed over in the stories of great conquerors. Military campaigns were not just about glory or strategic advantage. They were also enormous financial enterprises, and the spoils of war were essential for funding them. The wealth stripped from Persepolis's walls literally financed the next phase of Alexander's march across the continent. The empty, scarred stone serves as a stark balance sheet, a physical record of one empire being liquidated to fuel the ascent of another. It reminds us that the story of ancient conflict was often written not in blood, but in gold, and that the most enduring mark of victory can sometimes be a methodically crafted void. Even the most isolated cliff faces became a canvas for survival. High in the alcoves of Mesa Verde, the ancestral Pueblones did not just find shelter from the sun, they engineered a complete existence against the stone. Their walls are marked by long, vertical grooves, channels carved by both nature and human hands. These are not the scars of conflict, but the elegant solutions to a fundamental problem: how to live and thrive in an unforgiving, arid landscape. The relentless desert rains, when they finally came, did not nourish the crops. They poured off the mesa tops in sudden, violent sheets, threatening to flood the dwellings carved into the cliffs below. So the people became water architects. They carefully chiseled and enhanced natural fissures in the rock, transforming them into a precise gutter system. These grooves captured the precious runoff from the cliffs above, channeling every drop away from their living spaces and into waiting cisterns or meticulously maintained terrace gardens below. But the innovation did not stop at drainage. Look closer at the interior walls of their storage rooms. and you will find another kind of mark, shallow, smooth depressions and carefully placed niches. These were designed for storing pottery jars of grain and water, keeping them cool and stable in the constant shade of the alcove. The placement of each groove and niche was a calculated decision, a way of turning the rock itself into a temperature-controlled pantry. These subtle modifications reveal a society that listened intently to its environment and answered with brilliant, practical ingenuity. They were not fighting the desert, they were collaborating with it, using the very structure of their home to harness its scarce resources. The grooved walls of Mesa Verde stand as a quiet testament to a different kind of power, not the power to conquer, but the profound, enduring power to adapt. Even the smallest stones hold the grandest designs. While the massive sarcens of Stonehenge capture all the attention, the true story of its purpose is often written on a much smaller scale. On the weathered surfaces of nearby barrows and the low, surrounding walls, archaeologists have discovered collections of faint, almost invisible scratches. These are not the deep gouges of construction or the dramatic scars of conflict. They are delicate, precise lines, carefully etched into the stone, often arranged in arcs or clusters. For a long time, they were dismissed as natural weathering or the idle marks of later visitors, but their consistent patterns and specific locations tell a different tale. These scratches appear to be deliberate notations, a permanent record kept in stone. The most compelling theory is that these are astronomical markings, a primitive calendar system tracking the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. A particular cluster of lines might represent the days leading up to a solstice, or the position of a significant constellation on a specific night. This suggests that the people who built Stonehenge were not just erecting a monument, they were conducting a continuous, meticulous observation of the heavens. The great stones provided the stage, but these small, scratched surfaces were the program notes, the behind-the-scenes calculations that made the celestial spectacle possible. Yet they might also point to something more human, a record of participation. Could each mark represent an individual who took part in a ceremony, a tally of witnesses to a sacred event? These subtle signs reveal a culture deeply engaged with the cosmos, yes, but also deeply communal. Their most enduring legacy was not just the ability to move massive rocks, but the desire to make their mark, however small, on the understanding of time itself. The imperial palaces of Nineveh were meant to project an image of unshakable power, their walls carved with scenes of Assyrian kings hunting lions and conquering armies. But these stone narratives did not have a peaceful afterlife. Look closely at the alabaster panels, and you will find a chaotic tapestry of damage that tells several conflicting stories. Some scars are clearly violent, the deep gashes left by spears and axes during the city's final, brutal sacking. Other sections show the slow, graceful wear of erosion, where wind and rain have softened the features of a carved king over centuries. But the most telling marks are often the most methodical. You can find precise, square holes chiseled into the corners of sculpted slabs, perfectly placed to support the beams of a new wall. Long after the Assyrian Empire had crumbled into dust, later peoples moved into the ruins. They did not see a sacred monument to be preserved. They saw a convenient quarry, a ready-made source of excellent building material. These settlers carefully pried apart the palace walls, hauling the sculpted stones away to form the foundations of their own homes and barns. A panel depicting a royal chariot charge might end up as a humble threshold, worn smooth by generations of passing feet. A depiction of a conquered enemy city could become part of a sheep pen. This recycling was not an act of disrespect, but one of pure pragmatism. It shows how the legacy of a place is constantly being rewritten by those who come after. The marred walls of Nineveh reveal that a city is never truly dead. It is a living entity that evolves through cycles of destruction and reuse, its grandest monuments slowly broken down and absorbed into the fabric of daily life for centuries to come. The desert stone of Choco Canyon holds a different kind of time. Across the massive, geometrically precise walls of this great Puebloan complex, you will find not the chaotic marks of disaster, but an elegant grid of deliberate, shallow cuts. These are not accidental scars. They are a sophisticated language of light and shadow, a permanent calendar etched directly into the architecture. The builders of Choco did not merely observe the sky, they wove its rhythms into the very fabric of their city. On specific days of the year, a sliver of sunlight would pierce a carefully aligned port or window, its beam traveling across the wall to land directly on one of these precise chisel marks. One mark might be illuminated only on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. Another might catch the light solely on the winter solstice, or perhaps during the spring and autumn equinoxes, when day and night are of equal length. But their knowledge went even deeper than the sun. Some researchers believe certain patterns of marks were designed to track the far more complex 18.6-year cycle of the moon, predicting its minor and major standstills, the points where it appears to rise and set in the same place for several years. This was not abstract science, it was the beating heart of their society. These astronomical events dictated the ceremonial calendar, telling people exactly when to plant, when to harvest, when to hold the most sacred rituals that maintained balance in their world. The wall itself became a communal clock and a spiritual guide, transforming a cosmic event into a tangible, shared experience for everyone gathered in the plaza. In a world without paper or digital alerts, the architecture was the notification system, the city itself a grand, silent orchestrator of daily life and divine order. Even the mighty Roman Empire met its match in the northern mists. Hadrian's Wall, that great stone slash across Britain, stands as a monument not just to imperial ambition, but to its ultimate limits. Its scarred surfaces tell a story of constant friction, of a frontier that was never truly quiet. On one side, you see the brutal punctuation of conflict. There are deep, ragged pocks where Caledonian tribes hurled stones from slings, trying to breach the defenses. You can find the scoring marks left by axes and fire along the gates, evidence of repeated attempts to burn and batter a way through. These are the expected wounds of war, but the more telling scars are the ones inflicted by the land itself. The northern face of the wall, constantly battered by wind and relentless rain, shows a completely different kind of damage. The stones there are worn smooth, almost polished by the abrasive weather, their edges rounded by centuries of storms that no legion could ever defeat. This contrast paints a vivid picture of the Roman experience in Britain. They were not just fighting a human enemy, they were battling an entire environment. The climate itself became a hostile force, eroding their structures as surely as any invading army. The wall's condition maps the extent of Roman control in a way no ancient text ever could. It was a border not just between peoples, but between two worlds, the ordered Mediterranean Empire and the untamable wilds beyond. Every weathered stone and battle scar whispers the same truth, that maintaining an empire is a constant, draining effort, and that sometimes the most enduring mark is not of victory, but of a long, costly stalemate etched into the cold, hard rock. The sheer endurance of faith is written into the very rock of Lalibela. Across the walls of these breathtaking churches, carved from the living mountainside of Ethiopia, you will find a dense tapestry of crosses and symbols. This is not the work of a single artist or a brief period of construction. It is a collective project of devotion spanning more than 800 years. Each mark, carefully incised by a pilgrim's hand, represents a personal connection to the divine, a prayer made permanent in stone. The walls here are a living document, a physical record of countless individual acts of reverence. Over centuries, these symbols have been layered one upon the other, creating a complex palimpsest where a 12th century cross might be surrounded by markings from the 1700s, all intermingled with scratches from just a few decades ago. This continuous engagement transforms the architecture. A church is not a static monument frozen in the moment it was completed. It is a living entity that grows richer and more meaningful with every generation that touches it. The walls become a map of spiritual journey, a testament to the human need to leave a mark, however small, on a place that feels holy. This slow accumulation of scars does not damage the sacred space. It consecrates it anew with every passing century, proving that a site's true power often comes not from its initial creation, but from the endless conversation between a place and its people. The story of a city can be fractured not just by its enemies but by its friends. In Babylon, the legacy of King Nebuchadnezzar II is etched into the very soil, a sprawling metropolis of myth and power. Its famous walls, once counted among the wonders of the ancient world, bear the expected scars of a long and turbulent history. You can trace the deep seismic cracks from earthquakes that rattled the very foundations of the empire. You can find the impact marks of Persian siege engines, the physical evidence of the conquest that would eventually end Babylonian dominance. These are the ancient wounds, the kind we have learned to read. But in Babylon, the story does not end there. Look closer at some of the most iconic structures like the Ishtar Gate, and you will see a different kind of mark, one that is jarringly modern. The bricks are too new, their edges too sharp, their vibrant glazes too bright against the weathered remnants of the original. These are the scars of reconstruction, of a massive restoration project undertaken in the 20th century. This modern intervention forces us to confront a difficult question. When we rebuild an ancient site, are we preserving history or are we rewriting it? The new bricks, stamped with the name of a former Iraqi leader, add a complex political layer to the stone, a contemporary chapter in a very old book. The wall becomes a palimpsest of not only natural disaster and ancient warfare, but of modern national identity and the powerful desire to reclaim a glorious past. It asks us where the line is between a restored monument and a recreation, and whether a wall can ever tell a single, true story once the hands of the present have touched it. The stone steps leading to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi are not rough and jagged, but unnaturally smooth, worn into gentle, flowing curves by the passage of millions of feet. This is not the work of a single storm or a brief era of popularity. This is a slow, patient polishing that took centuries to achieve, a collective action of countless individuals all moving toward the same sacred goal. Each pilgrim, each seeker of the oracle's wisdom, each athlete en route to the Pythian Games, contributed to this gradual transformation of the stone. The sheer depth of the wear reveals an almost unimaginable scale of human traffic. It transforms an abstract idea, a pan-Hellenic religious center, into a tangible, physical reality you can see and even feel underfoot. In a world of fiercely independent and often warring city-states, Delphi was a rare unifying force, a Spartan and an Athenian who might meet as enemies on a battlefield tomorrow, would both walk these same smooth steps today to pay homage to a power greater than their own conflicts. The polished stone is a testament to a shared identity that ran deeper than politics, a common belief in the divine that temporarily erased borders and forged a cultural connection across the entire Greek world. The walls and steps of Delphi were not scarred by conflict, but softened by consensus, worn smooth by the one thing that could bring the ancient Greeks together, a collective quest for meaning. These fissures run deep through the very foundations of Mycenae, the great citadel of the Bronze Age. Unlike the clean, sharp breaks of a siege weapon, these are chaotic, sprawling fractures that speak of a force far greater than any human army, the shuddering of the earth itself. The massive cyclopean walls, built from stones so large they were said to be the work of giants, are split in ways that no invading force could have accomplished. These are seismic scars, the lasting wounds from ancient earthquakes that rattled the Peloponnese. For a civilization built on such a geologically unstable peninsula, a major tremor was not just a temporary disaster, it was a direct threat to their entire concept of security. A single quake could shatter not only their storied walls, but the very illusion of safety they were meant to project. Yet the story of Mycenae's decline is not written solely in these natural cracks. Interwoven with the evidence of shifting ground are the unmistakable signs of fire, layers of soot and ash and heat-shattered stone. This combination tells a far more complex and chilling tale. It suggests a civilization struck by a natural catastrophe, only to be finished off by a human one. Was a powerful earthquake the opening that opportunistic raiders had been waiting for? Did the disaster fracture more than just the palace walls, perhaps shattering the political order and economic systems that held the Mycenaean world together, leaving it vulnerable and bleeding? The fissures in the stone force us to consider a collapse not from a single cause, but from a perfect storm of environmental shock and human violence, where nature delivered the first crippling blow. Buried beneath the modern streets of Mexico City, the original stones of Tenochtitlan tell a story of systematic replacement. The Aztec capital was not merely conquered, it was methodically unmade and remade into something new. On these sunken walls, you can trace the frantic chisel marks of Spanish conquistadors and indigenous laborers, hastily prying apart the symbols of a vanquished world. Each gouge is a record of demolition, a violent erasure of the old gods and the old order. But the story does not end with destruction. These same stones, scarred and stripped of their original meaning, were often hauled away to be used as the foundation for Spanish churches and government buildings. The physical act was a powerful metaphor. The empire of the Aztecs literally became the footing for the new colonial state, its history buried and built over. This architectural palimpsest reveals the most intimate mechanism of colonization, a process where cultural dominance is not just declared, but physically enacted, stone by stone, until one civilization disappears beneath the weight of another. The relentless winds off the Mediterranean have scoured the marble columns of Leptis Magna for centuries, carving soft, undulating curves into what were once sharp, precise edges. This is not the sudden violence of a siege or the deliberate chip of a chisel, but the patient, grinding work of countless desert storms. The very air in this part of Libya is thick with fine sand, a natural abrasive that acts like sandpaper on a monumental scale, slowly polishing the grand Roman facades into smooth, ghostly forms. Alongside this, a more insidious force is at work: salt weathering. Moist sea air carries salt crystals that settle into the stone's microscopic pores. As the temperature changes, these crystals expand and contract, exerting a pressure from within that slowly, grain by grain, prizes the stone apart. These are the scars of the environment itself, a slow-motion battle between human ambition and the elemental forces of earth and sea. They force us to ask a difficult question: what does true preservation mean when the greatest threat is not a conqueror, but the very climate that surrounds a site? The eroded walls of Leptis Magna stand as a stark reminder that our dialogue with the past is not a one-time event. but a continuous and often losing negotiation with nature. The stones of Göbekli Tepe present a different kind of mystery altogether. This ancient site in Turkey, dating back over 11,000 years, features massive T-shaped pillars carved with a stunning menagerie of animals. Yet the most telling story is not just in the carvings, but in the walls themselves, and the strange, deliberate fate that befell them. Entire sections of this monumental complex were systematically buried by the very people who built it. They filled their magnificent stone circles with thousands of tons of earth and rubble, entombing their own creation. This act of intentional concealment created a unique kind of scar. Over millennia, the immense weight of all that soil pressing down on the walls and pillars caused its own subtle damage, a slow, geological stress that cracked and strained the stone from within. Then, much later, when modern archaeologists began to excavate, their tools introduced a new set of marks, the careful but inevitable scratches and scrapes of rediscovery. This cycle of creation, burial, and unearthing is unlike anything else we have seen. It suggests a society engaged in a profound ritual of renewal. Perhaps they believed these sacred spaces had a limited lifespan, that their spiritual power needed to be periodically retired and literally returned to the earth, only to be symbolically reborn in a new circle built nearby. The chiseled rocks of Göbekli Tepe are not just scarred by time or conflict. They are marked by a deep, cyclical philosophy, a belief that everything, even the most permanent-seeming monument, must eventually be hidden away to make room for a new beginning. The very walls of Hattusa, capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, present a complex mosaic of fracture and repair. This was a city that knew it lived on unstable ground, both politically and geologically, and its fortifications tell a story of repeated trauma and brilliant adaptation. You can see the deep, chaotic fissures left by powerful earthquakes that shook the Anatolian plateau, threatening to bring the entire city down. Alongside these natural scars are the brutal pockmarks of siege warfare, the impacts from enemy battering rams and projectiles aimed at breaching the defenses of a powerful rival. But it is the Hittite response to this damage that is most revealing. Instead of simply replacing shattered stones with identical ones, their engineers developed an almost artistic approach to repair. They would often fill cracks and gaps with a completely different type of stone, or even with baked clay bricks, creating a vivid patchwork of contrasting colors and textures across the wall face. This was not a haphazard fix. It was a calculated engineering solution, using a softer, more flexible material like clay to fill a crack created a shock-absorbent joint, a buffer that could flex and settle during future tremors without shattering the entire structure again. These repairs are a permanent record of a highly organized civic response to disaster. They show a society with the resources, the skilled labor, and the technical knowledge to assess damage and implement innovative solutions quickly. The patched walls of Hattusa do not speak of a civilization brought low by catastrophe, but of one that was consistently tested and repeatedly proved its resilience, weaving its own recovery directly into the fabric of its most important city. The walls of Jericho hold a stain that time has not been able to wash away. Unlike the polished stones of Delphi or the grooved channels of Knossos, the evidence here is a dark, pervasive shadow burned deep into the ancient masonry. Archaeologists excavating the site have uncovered layers of intense fire damage, a thick blanket of ash and soot, and stones cracked and reddened from unimaginable heat. This is not the signature of a simple kitchen fire or an accidental blaze. This is the clear, catastrophic evidence of a city that was deliberately and completely consumed by flame. The pattern of destruction is total, leaving no doubt that the inferno was an act of conquest, a deliberate effort to erase a powerful settlement from the map. For generations, the story of Jericho's fall was known primarily from a single, powerful source, the biblical narrative. That account describes the city's walls coming down, followed by its complete destruction by fire. For a long time, this was treated as a matter of faith, a story separate from physical proof. But the scorched stones tell a different tale, one that aligns with the ancient text in a startling way. The archaeological evidence places this city wide burning at a specific point in the Bronze Age, a time frame that fits within the historical context of the biblical account. This correlation does not necessarily prove every detail of the story, but it provides a powerful, tangible anchor for it. The soot on these walls transforms a legendary event into a historical one, showing us that the story likely grew from a real, devastating trauma that scarred the collective memory of the entire region. It reveals how a single act of destruction can echo for millennia, first in oral traditions and sacred texts, and finally confirmed in the silent, stained stone that started it all. These fresh wounds are tragically modern, etched not by time or nature, but by the deliberate violence of contemporary conflict. In the ancient oasis city of Palmyra, Syria, the stones bear scars that are painfully recent, a stark and sobering addition to the long narrative of human upheaval. This is not the slow erosion of wind or the sudden crack of an earthquake. These are the brutal impacts of artillery shells and the deliberate defacement from power tools, marks left by those who saw this World Heritage Site not as a treasure to be preserved, but as a symbol to be erased. The majestic Temple of Bel, which stood for nearly 2,000 years, was methodically reduced to rubble. The iconic faces of statues were smashed from their bodies, an attempt to annihilate a culture's visual memory. These acts were calculated, a form of ideological warfare where destroying the past was a weapon for shaping the present. It forces us to confront a difficult truth that our shared heritage is never truly safe. It exists in a fragile balance, perpetually vulnerable to the conflicts and convictions of every new generation. The scarred walls of Palmyra are a somber lesson, a reminder that the dialogue between past and present is not always one of reverence. Sometimes it is a shout of anger, and the most enduring marks are those we are creating right now, adding a complex and heartbreaking chapter to the silent language of stone. Yet even these stories of intentional erasure can be rewritten by nature itself. Across the Mississippi River from modern St. Louis, the great earthen mounds of Cahokia rise from the Illinois floodplain. These are not stone walls, but massive structures of packed soil and clay, and their surfaces hold a different kind of record. The scars here are not from chisels or fire, but from the slow, patient work of countless hands and the relentless press of weather. You can see the marks of repeated building phases, where one layer of earth was piled atop another, each new addition expanding the grand platforms and plazas. These layers are like tree rings, a physical timeline of the city's growth. But look closer, and you will also find the scars of collapse. Certain sections show slumping and deep erosion gullies, places where heavy rains carved wounds into the sides of the mounds before they could be stabilized. These are not just signs of decay, they are evidence of a constant, desperate battle against the elements, a fight to maintain the very foundations of their world. The patterns of repair are incredibly revealing. Some mounds were hastily patched, suggesting a rapid response to a sudden crisis, perhaps a catastrophic flood that threatened the city's heart. Others show meticulous, long-term maintenance, with new layers of special, water-resistant clay carefully applied to prevent future damage. This tells us that the people of Cahokia were not just brilliant builders, but masterful environmental managers. They were reading the land, understanding the river's moods, and adapting their engineering to survive. The rise and fall of this great city is literally mapped in the soil. The ambitious, rapid construction phases speak of a powerful, centralized authority capable of organizing thousands of workers. The later, more frantic repairs hint at social strain, a possible failure of that authority as environmental pressures mounted. The final scars, the deep, unrepaired gullies, are the silent end of the story, marking a point where the people could no longer hold back the water, or perhaps simply decided to walk away from the struggle. The mounds of Cahokia remind us that a civilization's most enduring dialogue is often not with its enemies, but with the very ground beneath its feet. From the first scratches in a Neolithic home to the final erosion of a mighty mound, these silent stone narratives offer us something profound. They grant us a tangible, tactile link to the people who came before us, a way to reach across millennia and touch the very struggles and triumphs that defined their existence. Each mark, whether born from a sudden disaster, a sacred ritual, or the simple repetition of daily life, adds a crucial layer to the immense story of human resilience. We see that our ancestors were not so different from us. They faced earthquakes and droughts, they fought wars and built empires, they prayed to their gods and kept count of their days, and they left the evidence of it all not in books, but in the very fabric of their world. Preserving these fragile, non-written records is more than an academic pursuit. It is an act of honoring those silent voices, of ensuring that their endurance is not forgotten. We would love to hear which of these scarred wall stories resonated most deeply with you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this journey into the language of stone, subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries.